Thank you for joining me on day one of Outdoor Retail. It's such a beautiful day in SLC. My name is Quentin Humphrey. Everyone just calls me Q for short, so please just call me Q for short. I am the head of client engagement at WGSN and also a creative strategist at WGSN. Came all the way from Brooklyn, New York. Had a lovely flight yesterday. It's so beautiful to be in Utah. This report that I'm going to present to you today is called The Future Consumer for 2025. It is truly a labor of love. It's one of our flagship pieces of research that we present far and wide, as far as Brazil and as close as Canada. And we're adapting a bit to touch on the outdoor market. But the idea here is that we want to give you the tools to really be able to speak to the consumer of tomorrow. So in 2 years' time, a lot of these strategies and ideas will be things that you can implement if you're not already implementing them. Before we dive into it though, I want to bring your attention to this QR code. We have a really robust presentation, but we didn't include every single thing. So if you scan this QR code, we'll give you the hottest intel the streets have to offer. If you are interested, just ask for a few pieces of information so that we can get you all integrated. But before we kick off, I wanted to give you a quick breakdown on what is WGSN. What is this company, this trend forecasting agency? It's a place I call home for one, but secondly, we are the world's largest trend forecasting agency, giving our clients from various business strategies, verticals, continents, all the tools that they need to really figure out what's next and all the things they have going on. And how do we do this? It's a pretty robust process where we observe, synthesize, then analyze, and finally we come up with strategies that we can pass along for businesses across the board, not just in the outdoor market, but in all verticals, to really leverage, to really build some products that really have an impact with the communities. And this is a quick look at some of our trends, I'll say, some of the innovations, and they're all interconnected, right? If we call it a trend a year ago, if we called it a trend a year ago, you can see the evolution in the trend and how it's connected to some of our futuristic strategies. So we can share this as a follow-up, but again, the idea here is that all these ideas, all these themes, all these tent poles are closely interconnected. And as we look to 2025, one thing that we can surely rely on is that there will be seismic change. And even in a year's time, things are shifting very quickly. We live in a really precarious society today. So as we look ahead, it's really going to be important to come up with some strategies, again, to future-proof your business, but also looking at growth. It's not a dirty word. I know that sometimes we all have some growing pains, but the key to future-proofing your business is that growth. And so first, to really understand the future consumer, to really understand this next iteration of commerce and consumption, you gotta understand the consumer sentiments, and this is really pivotal to how we work at WGSN. These feelings, these behaviors, these ideas are really driving how the consumers of 2025 will be responding. And here are those 4 key sentiments. First, dissociation, followed by idleness, something we could all use a bit more of. Then radical acceptance, and last but most certainly not least, neo-altruism. And in the interest of time today, we won't dive into neo-altruism, but again, that QR code that you saw in the beginning, if you scan that, we can give you a little bit more intel on how people are being very altruistic as we look ahead. But first, I want to dive into dissociation. And this is something that we all do pretty frequently. We might not notice it. Sometimes you're just zoning out, maybe at a keynote like one today. Sometimes you're driving and you don't realize, but you miss your exit. But at some point, you're scrolling on your phone and you don't realize you've been scrolling for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And with this idea of dissociation, we tend to disconnect from our thoughts, from our values, and even from our identity. And this is becoming really prominent as we think about how connected we are to all of our devices, how connected we are to technology, and how sometimes we're just on autopilot, thanks to AI and so many other innovations. But moving forward, digital dissociation will be the next phenomenon. And thinking about how we're connected to these devices and what it means, because almost everyone's online, mostly, and people who are online take part in social media at a really unhealthy rate. And this rate is really driving them, again, to step away from their values, their ideas, their thoughts, the things that have really got them to that place to begin with. And it's not just something that we're doing digitally, it's something that we're engaging with. There's content around dissociation. There's ways that we're thinking about how we can disconnect. And if you go on TikTok, I'm sure some of us are on that really addictive app, you'll see that there are almost 500 million TikTok videos and views about all things dissociation. But beyond that, there's also dissociation music, and this is something that pitchforks describe as artists combating the hell of modern existence with a blank detachment in their voices. And so this isn't something just happening from a consumption standpoint, it's also happening from the cultural landscape as well. And one of the largest and fastest growing forms of digital dissociation is VR and XR gaming. And this is something we think about at WGSN in so many iterations. One of our key trends for this year was actually mindful gaming. And that's gaming being used as a therapeutic treatment, sometimes for dementia, sometimes for Alzheimer's. But either way, there are so many clinical trials that are reframing gaming, not just as a hobby or a vice rather, but it's something that can really get us to that next level of connection. But again, those who are gaming tend to dissociate. And so come 2025, it's likely that there will be so much technology, new devices, new products that really help us to dissociate and also to combat that dissociation. One of them being Neurable's headphones that has these really interesting electrodes in it. And if it finds that you're zoning out or just listening to music for too long without movement, it'll give you a slight nudge, a slight buzz that'll give you a little bit of awareness about how long you just sat still, not doing anything, even if that was the intention. And on to idleness, our next sentiment, which is really important because somewhere along the line, the idea of idleness became a bad word. People think if you're idle, you're lazy, you're not doing anything, you're not participating in hustle culture, which has created some really toxic behaviors across the board. And for one, it's really important to know that being idle is really important because it's essential to our well-being. It helps us gain perspective, and also it helps us shift how we're thinking about certain things if we're just sat still for a certain period of time. And so looking ahead, when we start looking at wellness from a holistic perspective and not just the active activities that we're participating in, sitting still will be that much more important. And there's so much data that points to the fact that if you really want to be creative, if you really want to take that next step in your business model, it's important to sit still. That being said, a study by the University of California and the University of York found that 40% of creative breakthroughs actually come from bouts of downtime. So if you're in a creative rut, if you're stuck, maybe be intentional about being still for a period of time, and you'll find that you'll get a little bit of a creative push. And beyond that, like I mentioned, idleness has taken a backseat to hustle culture as people are finding ways to be productive even when they're meant to be still. And this is leading to some new toxic workplace cultures and behaviors, one of them being presenteeism and the other being leaveism. And leaveism is a really sad phenomenon where people take holiday, and when they're on vacation, they're doing the work that they didn't have time to do during the office hours. So imagine taking a vacation just to work. And people are doing that because they don't know how to be idle. We simply don't know how to sit still anymore. And in fact, there's a really interesting clinical study that put 15 people in a room for about 6 to 15 minutes, and those folks didn't know what to do with themselves. In fact, they'd rather administer an electric shock rather than sit still, which proves that maybe suffering is more enticing than being idle. Something that we can all think about moving forward. Would you rather suffer or would you rather be still? Making idleness that much more important. But beyond leaveism, there's also presenteeism, which is a similar behavior where people are over-functioning, right? They're taking on more tasks, they're overachieving in the office, they're going to work when they're sick, they're going to work when they don't feel well, and it's leading to what we know as diminishing returns, right? You're not as productive when you're not feeling as good, and so the idea is really just need to take a step back, and really take some time to slow things down and participate in all things idleness. And our last sentiment for today is radical acceptance. And as we know today, we are in the midst of a poly crisis. Some are calling it a perma crisis. Everything from the cost of living crisis and inflation, the climate crisis that we're living through every single day, or even some of the wars that are happening all across the globe. It seems like we can't get a break. But radical acceptance is something that we're going to start leaning into as a society from a consumer perspective to really carve out a level of serenity in all of the chaos around us. But first, it's important to understand what is radical acceptance. It isn't tragic optimism. It really is about accepting things that you can't change and doing it in a way that's productive for you. So if you know something's happening, if you know something's festering around you, you're not contemplatively brooding over how it can affect you negatively. You're thinking about the steps that you can take that can have a positive impact about the situation, about the time frame, about the work, about your team, things that actually have an impact beyond just the negative thoughts that come with it. And this is also pushing this idea of the anhedonia effect. And this is sadly impacting quite a few folks, especially when it comes to Gen Z, folks who are uber connected, folks who don't get outside and touch grass enough. They're experiencing this anhedonia effect, which is simply put, the inability to experience any pleasure. Eating food, going for a walk, chatting with friends, having sex, nothing brings them pleasure. And this is due to the fact that they're not being idle, they aren't accepting their reality, and beyond that, they're isolated and they're lonely. And there's so much data that points to the fact that even though we are more connected than we've ever been, we're also lonelier than we've ever been, and more isolated than we've ever been at the same time. And this is also leading to what's being called the Great Sex Depression, where this radical acceptance is forcing folks into isolation, forcing folks into new social mechanisms where they aren't used to connecting with people in a real life sense. But beyond that, there's no cure yet for anhedonia. There's no treatment yet that gets folks back to feeling pleasure. But believe it or not, the one, although a little controversial, treatment for anhedonia right now has been ketamine therapy, which has been proven over a 2-week span to actually get folks back into the groove of things and feeling something that they haven't felt before. And no, it isn't a suggestion to try K. It is mere a reckoning that there are some alternative treatments that get folks back into feeling like themselves yet again. And this brings us to conscious hedonism, which is something that I think all of us here can agree to. Conscious hedonism is pleasure mixed with a little bit of consciousness, joy mixed with responsibility, and it's something that people are really leaning into because they want the best of both worlds. They want to go out and party, but they also want to go for a hike in the morning. They want to feel good, but also they want to enjoy all that life has to offer. And this lovely example comes from the Ukraine. A youth organization called Repair Together has been hosting what they've been calling cleanup raves, where they get together and they spotlight a specific region of the Ukraine that has been liberated from the Russian invasion, and they throw a techno party and they dance and they clean up all the rubble, and they have a community cleanup all to the backdrop of some ambient techno music. As you can see here, it's already been pretty clean, so now they're just enjoying the vibes. Also in London, we're going to start to see nightlife evolve just a bit. Pictured here is Misery, and they are an interesting collective that bridges the idea of the outdoors with nightlife. They go on these nature walks and they have touric shops where they go on foraging hikes, mostly meant to connect their community, but also to learn more about nature because many of them live in concrete jungles and they are really deprived from nature. And at the same time, radical acceptance is really going to push this idea of a new aesthetic of wellness. When we think of beauty, when we think of wellness, it's very clean, it's really shiny, it's really pristine, and that isn't really reflective of all folks that are participating in the wellness market from all levels. And so the idea here is that we're going to reframe wellness, and there's not going to be such an emphasis on wellness washing or messaging around products that gives a one-stop shop or an answer to really complex issues such as mental health. And beyond that, radical acceptance is really going to push more of an anti-aesthetic rebellion across the board. Last year's word of the year, does anyone know? Word of the year? It was actually goblin mode. And goblin mode describes this really cringe, almost slob-like aesthetic where people just don't care. And they're radically accepting the fact that, you know what, wellness comes from just taking time to sit still and do nothing. And also at the same time, it's okay if my house is a little dirty today. I'll get to cleaning it up at some point. And so those are our 3 sentiments to know. Again, we do have a 4th, neo-altruism. We'll get to that QR code again. You guys can scan that and dive all things altruistic. But here are our profiles, because first we start by understanding those sentiments, those feelings that really start to impact the behaviors. And then from there, we dive into the profiles. And here are your 4 key consumers to know for 2025. First, the new nihilist, followed by the reductionists, then the timekeepers, and last but most certainly not least, the pioneers, which all of us in here are pioneers to some degree, so I think that'll resonate really strongly with this group. But I do want to call out that in the interest of time, we won't run through all 4 of those consumer groups, just the first and the last, all into the new nihilist, because when we think about nihilism, we think of folks just giving up and not caring. And that's not true for the new nihilists, because they're reframing this thinking. We live in a really precarious state right now. There's no telling what will happen next year with our business, with our job. There are so many layoffs happening. The climate emergency is wreaking havoc on all of us. But with these new nihilists, they're reframing the idea that since everything is meaningless, that the possibilities are ultimately endless. And this is driving a new motivation behind some of their behaviors when it comes to shopping, when it comes to spending their time, and also when it comes to connecting in the third space and in the physical. But I do want to call out that optimistic nihilism isn't tragic optimism, right? It isn't just this idea of thinking everything's okay and getting away from your reality. It's this idea, again, of accepting the things that you can't change and doing it in a way that is productive and positive for all things that you have going forward. At the same time, it's a really interesting step at taking an individualized path to success or carving out what success means to you as an individual. And it's not all doom and gloom. I know sometimes nihilism is synonymous with apathy, with people just not caring. But the idea is that it's really centered that things are all coming together in different ways. And if nothing matters, then everything matters. The sky is the limit. This cohort is really looking for ways to reinvent themselves and, again, reinvent that path to success. And beyond that, there are so many different cohorts that are coming together, and they think different things about business. They aren't the capitalists of generations past. They actually have some more pro-social behaviors, and so much so that it's creating some new opportunities for business, one, to engage with them, but also to facilitate community in ways that we haven't seen before. Definitely leveraging technology and leveraging new styles of connecting in the digital world. One of them being Gen Z VCs, which is a really interesting small cohort. It started off back in 2020 as a Slack channel with just 30 members, and today it boasts over 20,000. And what Gen Z VCs does is it connects folks who are really interested in this idea of regenerative finance. They want to keep the money flowing within their community. They want to find ways to give back. They want to empower individuals to support their own community with their own community-led initiatives. And if you are familiar with Gen Z VCs, it's a great case study in how youth, again, are bootstrapping and also empowering the next iteration of commerce from a community-first perspective. And at the same time, local legislation is changing and also driving local commerce. I myself, I said I came from Brooklyn, but I'm originally born and raised in Boston. And in Boston, we have this lovely town called Nantucket. And Nantucket's a beautiful beach town. And they've had this really interesting law for about 20 years now where big box retailers were not allowed to set up shop there. Only mom and pop shops, only local coffee shops, only local businesses were allowed to set up shop in Nantucket. And this is something that's festering in a great way, because now local businesses have more of an opportunity to expand their footprint. But beyond that, for bigger brands, this is an opportunity to figure out how are you partnering with these local communities? How are you reimagining your business? And in Europe, this is also in line with some of the anti-capitalist sentiments that are going on. Again, speaking about those pro-social behaviors, those anti-capitalist sentiments, and that's leading to these petitions across Europe that are really flagging that they don't want to see ads for petrol. They don't want to see ads for gas. They want businesses to outlaw, or legislation rather, to outlaw any business purporting that they are doing good for the planet, especially if they're involved with anything petrol related. But for big box retailers, they actually have the opportunity to really reimagine their business. This is Bloomie's here, and some of us shop at Bloomingdale's, and we call it Bloomie's on the regular. But Bloomie's is an interesting format where they reimagine their storefront. Smaller, more localized. They hire local craftsmen and local tailors to come in and do the work. They bring in local brands, and they craft the offering to really be reflective of the local environment. And not every retailer can do this, but again, if we think about what that future of local legislation means and how we can integrate in these communities, Bloomie's is a great look ahead at what that means. But beyond that, we're also going to see more UX experiences and UI experiences that are really reflective of some of these values. And I wish I had another screen so I could show you some of these, but there are so many great ones, including Miola, which is really interesting because it hosts about 50,000 products founded by an Indian entrepreneur based in Delhi, New Delhi rather. And the idea here is that this is Amazon for Gen Z. The products are sustainable, they tell the stories of their founders, and it gives folks a chance to shop with their values. It isn't about just buying something because it's cheap, it's about buying something because it's what you can believe in and aspire to be. And although that's in India, there are also some food-based CPG companies doing something really similar here in the States, including Consumer House, which is, again, hyper Gen Z focused. And the idea here is it's really about the user experience. They're really concocting a space based on the mood, based on the colors, and allowing you to shop with your preferences that really go beyond what you want to spend and what your budget is. And beyond that, based in the UK, there is Woo, W-O-O. And it's phenomenal because although it is commerce, it really does put the focus on the content, creating things that center holistic wellness and not just active workouts, but also how you can talk about sexual wellness, how you can talk about mental wellness, how you can get outside and connect with new friends, And the best part about Woo is they bucket their products in some really interesting categories. So for instance, if you're interested in all things psilocybin, you can click Trippy. If you're looking for sexual wellness, you can click the Horny tab. And again, it really is about creating that user experience that speaks to the next generation. On to the pioneers. Because in 2025, this cohort will really operate at the fringes. They're really looking to reinvent themselves, reinvent their lifestyle, and they're looking for new places and spaces to really be involved in. And this is also bringing to life what we're calling the Great Migration. In New York City, and I can tell you firsthand, during the pandemic, so many people left the city. They wanted space, they wanted to touch grass, they wanted to go for a hike, and they've left the city and they haven't really come back. And this isn't just in New York, it's happening in Tokyo, it's happening across Europe, it's happening in Mexico City, where folks just aren't as moved to be in these densely populated areas. And these pioneers are diving into this with new communes and other places and spaces that they can really gravitate towards that really speak to their evolved sensibilities, especially when it comes to being closer to Mother Earth. And a recent study across Europe, 8 European cities, found that 57% of all people interviewed in this survey found that they want more green space. They don't have enough. They don't have enough space for biking, they don't have enough space for walking. They live in these cities that are dominated by cars or dominated by subways, and they're looking to get out of those spaces. And this is creating so many opportunities, especially in cities like Barcelona, where they're coming up with these massive city blocks designated for cycling across the city. But beyond that, there are some really innovative cities popping up, especially in Asia. In South Korea, there's a city called Echo Delta Smart City, which is just what it appears to be, a smart city where they are hosting just about 54 families right now. And the idea here is that they're giving them space to sort of experiment with the new city and give feedback. And that feedback will then be leveraged to build new programs, new facilities, and new ways of living that really do speak to this next generation of working. And it's not just happening from a government perspective. Brands are also building cities as well. Toyota Woven City is also in Japan. If you didn't know this, and I actually learned this very recently, Toyota is actually a city in Japan. So believe it or not, Toyota actually has some really interesting ties to Detroit because they're both motor cities. And Toyota took it a step further by creating Woven City, which is, again, another attempt at a smart city that is taking strides, leveraging the data from the families that is really being used to create a city that's more prosperous for these pioneers, for folks that want technology, but they also want to be that much closer to Earth. And this idea of digital nomads is not a new concept at all, but due to this evolving lifestyle, it's actually starting to shift a bit. And there's so much data that points to the fact that, one, digital nomads are on the up and up. They're booming, not just here in the States, but across South America and also Western Europe and Asia as well. But beyond that, digital nomads have so much to offer. Yes, there will be 80 million of them come 2027 just here in the States. But also, digital nomads are known to contribute so much to local economies, typically shopping from local craftsmen, also shopping and buying in smaller batches, and really being an asset to these communities that they live in. So when we think about what the Great Migration means, especially for these digital nomads, it sees an uptick in the local commerce, pointing it back again to that local legislation and how these pioneers are also pushing this new idea of small being the best. Which brings us to a great connection point for these new pioneers. They're experiencing life in so many different ways. Many of them are gamers. Many of them are gaming on their phone, and they want these XR, VR, and AR experiences that really speak to this next iteration of connectivity. And this is driving this idea of G-commerce to the fore. G-commerce is short for gaming commerce, and it is a new way for folks to shop digitally. If you play Fortnite like my younger siblings, who unfortunately for me have my debit card attached, they just shop away. And every so often I get a charge for about $40, and it's just because they're buying digital goods on Fortnite. So believe it or not, gaming commerce is a massive opportunity, not just for brands in fashion, but for outdoor brands as well. Think about how you can partner some of your products. If you buy something in the physical, how can it be connected again to the digital? Is there a partnership with 2K Sports that could be implemented? Is there a partnership with Animal Crossing where, again, gaming isn't as much a competition as it is a way to spend time and be mindful of who you're spending your time with? Which brings us to an interesting case study. Gucci Gaming Academy, Gucci being one of the premier luxury houses that we know today, is really diving deep into the world of gaming, creating this gaming academy that is a partnership with the World Health Organization, who we commonly know as WHO. And with this, they're really trying to create a pioneering space for gamers. They want them to focus on their mental health. They want them to do it in a way that's stylish, in a way that's comfortable, but also in a way that keeps them in tune with the reality. We don't want them to spend all their time gaming, but while they are gaming, we want them to feel supported, we want them to be stylish, and we want them to be well taken care of. And it'll also be really important to think about how you can bring online offline. There are so many times where we see a product online on TikTok and it's booming and now this business is doing so great and it's just from a viral moment. But there's so many more ways to capitalize on things happening on the internet, not just on TikTok. And the idea is really to leverage creator commerce. In our last Future Consumer Report, we spoke about going from viral to visual merchandising, which is viral to VM. But now it's taking it a step further. How can we really work closely with these creators, these influencers, these thought leaders, those who are really a part of the community, who have a voice and a say in what the community does? And this brings us to creator commerce, because as we look ahead, 2025 will really usher in new ways of concocting business, new ways of collaborating, and again, new ways of seeding and rolling out products in a way that is additive to our business. And again, it's not just about fashion. It lends itself to so many other businesses. As we look ahead, we're going to see niche as the new norm. Pictured here is Dylan LeMay, a really popular TikToker. He's actually known for his food content, specifically with ice cream. He creates these really delicious and delectable frozen treats, and he's developed a really strong following, so much so that he's actually opened up an ice cream shop in New York, situated in NoHo, and it's called Quentin. And what's great about this ice cream shop is, one, the food is amazing, right? You can get some treats or some cones, but beyond that, they're calling it retail theater. Because every time you step into Quentin, you have the opportunity to go viral because they're constantly filming live, they're constantly creating content, and they also invite their community to create content with them. So if you are so inclined to be a part of the video, or you do have something witty to say, you can be a part of the moment as well. And there's also Detour. If we think about shopping and creator commerce, it isn't just about buying new products. It's about that secondhand pipeline, what we're calling the social media to secondhand pipeline more specifically. Because back in the day, and when I say back in the day, just a few years ago, you'd see something worn online and you'd want to get it, but you wouldn't know where to get it. You might have to wait a couple of weeks or maybe even a couple of months to figure out what brand is actually producing said product, said item, said car, etc. But now with platforms like Detour, you can buy products directly from your favorite creators and influencers directly out of their closet. So when they wear something, you might be able to buy it, one, in real time, or very shortly after. And again, the idea here is not just about creator commerce, but about that secondhand pipeline that creator commerce is creating, and an opportunity for us together to leverage that to create some really interesting resellable experiences, whether it's in the physical space or, again, something like Detour, we offer secondhand products online via our favorite creators and influencers. And there's also food startups like PopChew, which is a delivery food service founded by Gen Zs for Gen Zs. Some of us have went on Uber Eats very recently and found what they've called a ghost kitchen, where you're ordering something from someplace and it's not a real restaurant, it only exists on Uber Eats, which is a shame because sometimes you actually want to experience that food in real time. And what PopChew does is it takes the idea of a ghost kitchen a step further by partnering with creators to create their own food brand or their own food restaurant. Interestingly, it's only about a 6-month turnaround time from concept to table. And they also allow these folks to do pop-ups and actually have some real-life experiences that bring the food to life. So although there aren't any real restaurants, with PopChew, they're creating an interesting brand that speaks to the sensibilities of these pioneering consumers, but at the same time, leverages their community for an experience that is culinary-based and allows them, again, to connect in real time. So that brings us to a few thought starters. There are a few looming ideas here, but just to connect all of them, some really interesting ideas, and these are really meant to be workshopped and really thought through when we see all the profiles and all the sentiments together. But the first one, simply put, is your brand human enough? How can you add a little bit more of a human sensibility to your brand, whether it's your messaging online, commenting on photos, or really giving a face and a name to your brand? Next, what's your investment strategy for good growth? And when we say good growth, we mean growth that is measured, that is ethical, and that is responsible not only for the planet, but for also your consumers who are participating in purchasing your products. How can we think about scaling things in a way that is additive and beneficial to the planet? Next, who has the creative control? We're speaking about creator commerce, we're speaking about ways to co-collaborate, but as we look ahead, collaboration won't be a one-sided thing. It isn't about just leveraging someone for their name, for their platform. Thinking about ways that we can make it two-sided, thinking about incubator programs, and also ways that we can build a two-way street so that, again, the community can also be participants in the production of the products as well. Next, which new levels of commerce are you interested in participating in? Whether it's G-commerce, ethical commerce, or anything in Web3, there are different ways that you can touch your consumer and different ways that you can bring experiences to life, both physically and in the digital realm. And last, but most certainly not least, how are you saving and sharing time? It's all about our consumers. It's all about how they're getting the most out of your products, getting the most out of your brand. So we want to streamline all the processes, especially when it comes to purchasing, experiencing, and doing all things related to your brand. Saving them time will be that much more beneficial to them, and again, boost that affinity. And so what? Why does any of this matter? Oh, for one, consumers and community are at the heart of everything we do. Without our consumers and without their communities, none of us would be here, and we wouldn't have much to share. We wouldn't have anyone to purchase from us. So the idea here is, as we move forward, the best way to create tomorrow, the best way to predict tomorrow is to create it. And you can't create it without your consumers. So keeping them at the heart of everything you do will be incredibly important as we look ahead. And I want to thank you for tuning in. Hopefully I didn't put you guys to sleep today. This QR code that you see here, you can scan this for the outstanding profiles and outstanding sentiments. There's so much juicy intel that we have to share with you. But again, want to make it as digestible as possible. So if you scan this QR code, it'll bring you to a landing page where you can enter your info and again, get those outstanding sentiments, some new papers, and some access to some latest intel we have, especially when it comes to webinars and other great pieces of intel that we have to offer. I also want to share, I'll be here all show. Would love to meet you guys if you want to chit chat. If you have any questions about anything we spoke about, would love to share anything and everything I have to offer. Thank you guys so much.